All right, guys, welcome back. Vivi Nutrition Radio. As I mentioned on the introduction, the person that I have in today's podcast and my guest today, she does not really need an introduction because you may have heard her speak on our podcast in the past. I think Lacey was I think it was like an episode 10, and then I think it was like an episode 30 something, and now we're getting closer to hit our 100 episode. And obviously, I brought her back to kind of share some knowledge bombs with you guys. Lacey, how are you today, my friend?
I am so good and honored to be back on your podcast. Third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm. That's correct. That just tells me that this is probably going to be one of the best ones so far. So thank you again so much for taking the time to actually be on here. I think a lot of people already know all about you, but why don't you just kind of like give us like the quick rundown of like what you've been up to? Because I think like a lot of things have changed ever since then. I know you're starting your own supplement line and all the different amazing things that you got going on. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, the last time your listeners heard me, I was a crazy cat lady. Now I'm the proud owner of a 3-legged dog. I'm doing a lot of things.
Was it a rescue dog?
Yes, he is a rescue dog. He is a
That is amazing. Male. What's his name or her name?
Gabe.
What is it?
Gabe. Like from The Office. When I got him, he was nice. Like in The Office, very just awkward and shy, and that's actually the complete opposite.
That's amazing. I never thought you were gonna go. You were gonna switch to the other side. What do your cats think of all this situation?
Oh, my cats want to murder him, but that's totally okay because he wants to eat them. So totally understandable.
Yeah, of course. It's a good relationship. Like it's a good balance that they're kind of creating there. Well, I'm sure your house is obviously then some sort of like crazy zoo a little bit in a way.
You see what happens.
That's awesome. So, okay. So I know that you're a proud dog owner. What else have you got going on?
I'm starting a supplement line all about women's health and hormonal balancing. So
which we're going to talk about today, which is great.
Talk about the thyroid. I am not creating a thyroid supplement because I do not believe in them, and we can talk about that later.
Great.
But a lot of people ask me that. I'm also 90% done writing my own book, so I'm really excited to get that published and out, A Woman's Guide to Hormonal Harmony. So
that's awesome. That's a really catchy name. I love it. It definitely once may make me want to buy it. So that's excellent. And you still obviously have a coaching program for people, right?
Yeah, so I have thrown every single nugget of wisdom that I've ever learned into this book. It's going to be way too much. Like people are going to be like, Lacey, I did not need to know all the science behind that. But you know what? I don't care. The more you know, the better, right?
Yep. That's exciting. Well, I'm glad that we're chatting about this because I'm sure that's probably going to launch soon enough for people to be able to get it.
Not so much because I'm trying to get the supplement line and the book to go at the exact same time. And nobody knows about trademarks. You know about trademarks. They take months.
Yep. They take months. It's a very lengthy process.
So I'm waiting on that. And I don't even know if my trademark's going to go through for my supplement line. So if it doesn't, then I'm looking at 3 more months out.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes time, but everything that is worth waiting, or everything that is good, is definitely worth waiting, right?
I agree.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it sounds like you're staying busy, so that's a good thing. So I love to, and you're probably gonna hear my dog barking outside. It's probably somebody delivering a package. But anyways, what I wanted to actually kind of talk a little bit more about is going to be obviously thyroid. I think in the past you talked about obviously your experience working with or for yourself, your own background and those different things like that. But at the same time, I feel like we haven't really kind of touched too much base on the part of thyroid. And I think it's definitely something that I'm getting a lot of questions about. So I figure we could probably kind of start this conversation by just kind of defining really what the thyroid is and what does it do. And then we'll get into what happens when it's not functioning correctly. So I always like to kind of lay out the foundation and the groundwork, and then we'll kind of build up on top of that as far as obviously conditions and issues like hypothyroidism and so forth. So let's start with the basics. Thyroid. What is it? What does it do?
Okay. So just like the mitochondria is quote unquote the powerhouse of the cell, your thyroid is the powerhouse of your entire metabolism. So why does this matter? Well, the thyroid essentially tells us how you are going to either lose weight, gain weight. It talks to and communicates with every single cell and tissue in your body. And it is what essentially is connected with everything from your digestion, your adrenal glands, your hormones, your gut, you name it. So really, the thyroid is the powerhouse of your entire body. And your thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland. It's found at the base of your neck, just below your larynx. So if you're thinking about like where my thyroid is, that Adam's apple area is just around there. So it's in charge of, like I said, fueling every single cell in your body, from metabolism, mood, cognition, hormones, heart rate, to growth and repair. Your thyroid is what can decide how you are going to live your life, and either if you're going to just focus on surviving or on thriving.
Okay, that's perfect.
The physiology is quite complex. So there's a lot of different hormones produced by our thyroid. We have T4, T3, reverse T3. We even have T1, T2, calcitonin. So there's a lot of different thyroid components in our body. And when it comes down to how the thyroid works, I think this is the thing that is the most important thing to understand, because when it comes down to the thyroid, it's not only like what could influence our thyroid and how it works, but it's also about how do the things that influence even the production of our thyroid hormones play a role. Yep.
So essentially what kind of like triggers them. And I know that kind of starts all the way up to like your, what we call like the thyroid stimulating hormone. So like TSH, right, and your pituitary gland.
Right. So quick facts for your listeners. Only about 20% of your thyroid production is T3. And T3 is, of course, your active component of your thyroid. It has to convert. Number 2, T4 must convert to T3 in order to do its job. Remember the next thing, the conversion process of your T4 to T3 requires a bunch of different nutrients, from zinc, selenium, even magnesium. It's heavily influenced by inflammation, stress, gut dysfunction, hormonal imbalances, heavy metals, mold. So a lot of different things.
This is the conversion that you're talking about, right? The T4 to T3, which T3 is, and then the T3 is like the basically the kind of like the active hormone from like your thyroid that kind of is in charge of doing everything. Is that correct?
Yeah. So T4 is produced, about 80% is made T4. T3 is about 20% produced. T4 must convert to T3 in your body in order for T3 to do its job. And T3 is what does the job.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, when you're like looking at, because I know like this kind of stuff you can measure on a blood on a blood test, or like, you know, when you go to a doctor and you kind of get like a thyroid panel. But I feel like most people, when they kind of get this done, they don't get the full picture from what I understand. So sometimes like they just only look at things like TSH, or they look in like just like T3, but they're not looking at other things that basically are involved with all these components that you're talking about. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the most frustrating thing. And it's not really the doctor's fault, because that's what they're told in medicine. Their endocrinology journals tell them exactly what to check. So TSH is a pituitary marker. TSH acts kind of like a thermostat reader to tell your body to upregulate or downregulate the production of your thyroid hormones. Mm-hmm. So per se, you can use quote unquote TSH as a marker of hyper or hypothyroidism. However, TSH does not always respond directly to the changes in T4 and T3. So you can have a TSH that's normal, but you can have a free T4 or a free T3 that's low or even high. TSH is a pituitary marker. If the pituitary is not getting the signal, whether that's because TRH, which responds to your hypothalamus, and then TSH actually responds to TRH, if there is a miscommunication in your body, then you are not getting optimal, you don't know your optimal thyroid status if you're just checking TSH. You have to check TSH, free T3, free T4. And the reason I say free is because a lot of doctors will also check total. And your thyroid, it's bound to a protein in your blood. And if you do not check the free levels, you can't check and see what is actually able to do its job. So to give you an example, think of like putting a boot on a car, right? So that protein bound is going to get on that boot, going to hold on to it, and you can't measure that in the blood. So that's what the bound protein does for the thyroid. So you have to check free T4, free T3, TSH. I love checking reverse T3, not in every single case. And I can dive more into that. But also you want to check TPO and TGAB antibodies. So those antibodies distinguish if you have autoimmunity present, if you have Hashimotos, aka the destruction of your thyroid gland happening. So that's really critical, because a lot of people, they'll just check TSH. They'll just check those free T3 and T4. Well, Hashimoto's is actually extremely prevalent in the world today, and in a lot of women, especially stressed out women. And if you do not check those antibodies can go unnoticed and continue destruction of your thyroid gland, with your thyroid, quote unquote, looking normal. And then out of the blue, your thyroid will be shot. You never checked for the destruction. And then out of the blue, now your thyroid is completely shot and you have to go on medication the rest of your life.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's why obviously the whole thyroid kind of conundrum is just such a complex thing, because there's just so many different moving pieces that I feel like it's just like the many different ways to interpret it. And the thing is like that I always hear like, oh, everything, my thyroid is normal. But then from what you're saying, a lot of times your thyroid could like, or at least like the values that most doctors are looking at could be normal, but they could be some underlying factors that we're not really kind of seeing.
Right. And I always ask when somebody says, oh, my thyroid's normal. I'm like, well, what did they test? Did they do a full entire thyroid panel?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we're probably going to talk some kind of like case study, well, not case studies, but just kind of like some examples of like, if I see some of these numbers in just a few minutes. But before we even get into that, so obviously we're sensing, we understand what the thyroid does and the importance that it has. But a lot of people obviously kind of have issues with it. Obviously, it's like you mentioned some words like hypothyroidism, Hashimotos, and all these different things. And it sounds like what's most predominant in many people, it's like an underactive thyroid, I think is the right term to use, or in some cases, hypothyroidism. Is that the same thing? And how do you define it, or how you like clinically look at it? Is it like basically based on values of like your thyroid when they basically do test, or there's a specific thing that, or a specific test that tells you like, yeah, this is exactly what you got going on?
Yeah. So when it comes down to diagnosis for your thyroid, typically they will diagnose hypothyroidism based on primary or secondary hypothyroidism. So primary hypothyroidism, there's an actual defect or issue with your thyroid actually producing thyroid hormone. Secondary hypothyroidism, there's something wrong with another gland, whether it's your pituitary, your hypothalamus. There's something wrong that's causing the thyroid not to have problems producing per se. So it's not destructive, it's not working. It's not working, but there's something that's influencing the thyroid. So when it comes down to them diagnosing, a lot of doctors go based off of TSH. So if you have a 5 on a TSH scale, they'll say, okay, you're hypothyroid. If you have a antibody of 10 or more on the scale, then they'll say you have Hashimoto's. If you have a TSH that's quote unquote normal, so about like anything from 2.5 all the way up to about 5, and your free T4 or free T3 are low, then they'll say you are subclinical hypothyroid. So there's a lot of different cases, and Hashimoto's would be the distinction of the TPO and TGAB antibodies. But for the most part, the most people that I see in my practice are subclinical hypothyroid.
Which is like what we call like the underactive thyroid. Is that what kind of like a sort of like a
thyroid is not working optimally?
Okay. And what are some of like, when you're looking at people in your practice, like, cause I feel like a lot of like, the conversations we're having that people are asking questions about this, like, how do you determine that? And then, of course, like blood work is going to be something that is important, but is there any specific symptoms that are sort of like prevalent or predominant in people that have, a subclinical hypothyroidism, and which is what you deal with the most?
Right. And I can speak for this myself because I have had it, and it is not your best friend. So when it comes down to these symptoms, we're looking at things from brain fog, trouble sleeping, aka insomnia, joint pain, muscle aches, low basal body temperature, menstrual irregularities. Then you're also looking at things from digestive distress to even losing muscle mass and losing weight that you don't want to lose. I see a lot of constipation as well. And then that further contributes to things like, SIBO, candida, developing all these overgrowths. So those would be the top symptoms that I see in my practice, with the biggest one being chronic fatigue and hair loss, for sure.
Okay. Is that what you kind of experience? Like when you, and how long have you been diagnosed with subclinical? And is that something that is recurrent? And like, is that how you kind of started to notice it in yourself?
Yeah. So there are very many types of root causes of hypothyroidism. So hypothyroidism can be caused by nutrition deficiencies. So something like selenium, iodine, B vitamins, iron, vitamin D, zinc. Having too much of a certain nutrient like iodine or too much zinc in relation to a copper deficiency. We're looking at environmental toxins that can cause it, heavy metals, xenoestrogens, gut infections, food intolerances, or intestinal permeability issues. Chronic infections like Lyme and EBV, which a lot of people think are crazy and don't really happen. But yes, I've seen it. Happens in my practice. Hormonal dysfunctions, adrenal dysfunctions, whether it's high or low cortisol, which was my issue. Then you're looking, of course, at like medications. Pregnancy can actually induce hypothyroidism, and tumor growths, of course. So for me, my hypothyroidism, it comes from my cortisol issues. So I had high cortisol, extremely high cortisol. And that was causing a downregulation in my thyroid hormone, not only in the creation, but the conversion of my T4 to my T3. So cortisol actually blocks that from happening. It blocks the conversion of your inactive to your active. Not only that, but cortisol also blocks that thyroid hormone from getting into the cell. So you can have quote unquote normal levels in the blood, but still have what's called cellular hypothyroidism. So I had both subclinical and cellular. My hormones were not able to get into the cell to do the job. Cortisol blocks that from happening. Also, if you have a lot of inflammation, you have an omega-3 deficiency, that also blocks that from happening because your lipid bilayer is it's like a gate, right?
Yep.
So we got to make sure that the gate's working properly. It's not damaged. And that cortisol is going to block anything from getting in.
This is fascinating, honestly, because like now that I'm thinking and I'm kind of like in my kind of like nerd brain is kind of connecting a million different things. So you mentioned that cortisol, which, you know, for people listening is obviously what we call like our stress hormones, when it's like chronically elevated, which we know can actually happen under, you know, a lot of like stress and, you know, obviously our day to day and that kind of thing. It essentially is affecting directly your thyroid hormone and how it's producing like those and how it's like basically like being activated. So essentially high cortisol blunts the responses of your thyroid from what you're saying. Did I understand that correctly?
It stops you from being able to utilize your thyroid hormone.
That makes perfect sense. And that's why sometimes, well, I guess that kind of leads to the question, like, you know, do you feel like sometimes like this could be one, not maybe, I'm sure like many of like root causes, for example, with the people that may struggle with weight, for example, like, you know, and struggling with weight loss when it comes down to it, and they do everything under the sun. And I'm sure like we know what that means in some cases, but they still feel that they struggle. Is this something that you typically see in your practice, for example?
Yes. And I call it metabolic resistance. Or burning the candle at both ends, just going, trying to overdo their cardio, under eating, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. And then you have downregulation of everything. Like I like to think of it as an upside down pyramid. So everything starts with your adrenal glands, with your cortisol levels. Then it goes to your thyroid. Then it goes to your sex hormones. Then it goes to your digestion. They all affect each other, and it becomes a downward cascade.
Metabolic resistance. Yeah. That's basically kind of like, I describe it similarly. It's kind of like you're kind of swimming against the current. Like you're just, you know, no matter how hard you kind of like do it, it just becomes harder and harder. And you feel like the more you do, the better it's going to be, when in reality, sometimes it's the opposite, which leads to a question. And we talked about this earlier, that one of the things that you, at some point, and you posted about this, you became a Netflix slug. And I would love to hear this story, because you did it on purpose as a way to treat a condition or as a way to manage your subclinical and cellular hypothyroidism that you're having. Can you share a little bit more about this? Right.
So I call it my sloughing technique.
Some people are going to love this, and some people are going to be like, how dare you tell me that I need to stop working out?
I know, right? My clients always... I have some that will cry and they're like, oh, but I want to work out. I'm like, I know, I've been there. Once you get over the fact that you miss your workouts and you get into a good show, you forget about it. Anyways, so with my hypothyroidism, I had extremely high cortisol. And with my high cortisol, the only way that I was going to be able to get that down was going to be just doing nothing. And when it comes down to cortisol, anything can cause that rapid spike. So you're looking at not only physical stress, so working out, but emotional and mental stress. So basically it meant that I needed to take a break from anything that could hyperstimulate my body to produce cortisol. So that meant, taking away my workouts, walks only, really relaxing. I spent a good amount of time, a few months actually, at my parents', which was extremely helpful to be with people, be more in nature, things like that. Absolutely Netflixing and just being a sloth as much as I could. I dropped down my clients 50%. I did every single thing that I could to truly be a sloth. And honestly, that was the only way that I was able to climb out of the cortisol hole.
And then were you measuring this before and after, or how were you actually kind of understanding whether your body was kind of like working through this, or okay, I feel better? Was it just more a subjective type of feeling, or you actually did some testing to figure out exactly where you were before and after?
I've done testing before and after in the past. With my most recent rebound, which honestly right now I'm about to enter into another rebound.
Well, if you're writing a book and launching a supplement thing, I would probably expect that, right?
Well, it's all symptoms. So there's certain things that I'll start noticing when I know my thyroid is starting to quote unquote crash. Chronic fatigue, that's a big one. I start noticing my digestion getting a little bit worse. I never have extreme bloating or diarrhea, anything like that, but just a little suboptimal, maybe a little bit more gassy than normal. I start waking up in the middle of the night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., or I wake up a few hours earlier than I normally would wake up. So say if I wake up at 8 a.m., then I'm waking up at 6 a.m. So I start noticing these sleep disturbances. I feel tired and wired at night. Luckily, that hasn't happened yet, but that's a huge indicator. Chronic pain, everywhere, walking outside, you just feel your joints screaming at you, hey, there's something wrong. Muscle loss, strength loss. And the biggest two ones that I see, water retention in the body and facial puffiness, especially right where my lymph nodes are. They will start to swell up. And sometimes I feel like I have something stuck in my throat, which is probably why people give me coughing at the single point, because I know I'm entering into this subclinical phase again.
Yeah.
Do it to myself. But yeah, those would be the top things that I know. And when those symptoms start diminishing, and I feel like when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel like I got hit by a truck, and my sleep is sound, and I feel like I'm dreaming, and I'm able to recall my dreams, and I start building that strength back up in the gym. That's when I know I'm in the clear.
Okay. Yeah. And then so obviously those are things that you kind of build and learn about yourself over a year. So I'm guessing, right? So at first, you were probably at the very beginning of this kind of stage, you were just still trying to figure out what was happening, which I think a lot of people in the audience are probably not necessarily kind of putting the dots together. You obviously, by experience, and now obviously you teach your clients to do this, you've been able to do so. What is kind of some of the things that, do you usually recommend testing as a way to kind of get started on this, or to try to identify some of these different issues, or you just simply start to figure out, okay, what is your day looking like? Is this something that is happening? What are some things that you have been feeling lately, or that type of question?
Yeah, my motto is test, don't guess. I don't always test on myself because I know my body by now. But in regards to cortisol, I always say you want to try and do before and afters. I love the Dutch test. So I use the Dutch test if I possibly can.
I wanted to ask you about that, yes.
Yeah.
What is the Dutch test?
So the Dutch test, dried urine hormone test. So it tells us not only the amount of hormones that you're producing, your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, your cortisol, your DHEA, but it's telling me how those hormones are metabolizing. So I get to see, hey, what are the pathways for your testosterone look like? Are you going down the 5-beta or the 5-alpha that produces DHT, which is 3 times more androgenic than the 5-beta pathway? With your hormones for your estrogen, what do your phase 1, your phase 2, your phase 3 look like? What's the issue? Are you going to more, the cancerous producing 4-OH? Or are you going down the 2-OH? Or are you going down the 16-OH? Which pathway are you going down? What could be slowing down that pathway? Cortisol. I'm able to not only, so there's a couple tests like ZRT that will check a 4-point cortisol. Cool. Yes, you get a full picture of your total cortisol creation, how that's going out throughout the day. But it doesn't check what's called metabolic cortisol. So total cortisol really is actually a 1 to 3% measure of your cortisol production, whereas metabolized cortisol, which shows up on the Dutch test and you're urinating out, is getting a big clinical picture of how your cortisol is not only being produced, but utilized and metabolized in your body. So I see a lot of people with total cortisol and metabolized cortisol not matching up. And that's what tells me somebody has liver detoxification issues, hypothyroidism, maybe they had a history of anorexia, which that is tied to. But it allows me to really see what their huge clinical picture for their cortisol could be, and their overall hormone production and elimination. The big
wow. Yeah, so obviously there's a lot like so it's not just as simple as saying like, oh, your cortisol is normal based on some blood work. So this Dutch test is essentially, because I have heard of it, and I think a couple of clients have recommended it based on some of the stuff that you talked about, which, you know, it sounds like it's just something that goes more in depth. It's not just like looking at a specific hormone, but obviously what is the pathway and everything that happens down the line, and it's measuring the metabolites, which is going to give you a better picture of like what's the pathway or what's kind of like the way basically that kind of like, you know, hormone is basically taken, right?
Right. My favorite part about the Dutch test is because it really gives you an image and it matches up with symptoms with why somebody feels a certain way and why their levels look the way they look.
Yeah.
And I'm all about for testing. Like, I love testing, but you can't just rely on, and I'm just saying this because I've seen a lot of different practitioners do it. You can't just test and treat the test results. You have to test, evaluate with the client and the patient what's going on, and treat the patient and their symptoms matching up in relation with the Dutch results. So you treat the client and their symptoms with the results. You don't treat just the results. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you obviously kind of have to like do like both. Like, you're looking at the data, but at the same time, you're also understanding where the client is. And I think that's definitely important. So, and I guess like before we kind of wrap up the part about the Dutch testing, is that something that people need to go to a doctor to get, or is that something like anybody can do?
So technically anybody can purchase it online, but you can be able to read it yourself.
Okay. Got it. Of course, you need somebody to be able to help you read it.
I'll go through somebody who knows how to read it.
Yeah, like, well, I even try to read it, and I don't think I'm like that kind of like, and I've been watching some of their webinars, but it's like, it's definitely something that you have to like do some like learning about.
That you got to learn.
Yeah, it's an entire thing. Yeah, that makes sense. Now let's talk about management and the treatment, or like the even like nutritional kind of aspect of all this. So let's say that you have somebody with subclinical hypothyroidism, and maybe this is different from somebody that is like actual diagnosed hypothyroidism. But what are some of the things that you kind of start to change? And I'm sure like it's a pretty holistic approach from the perspective of stress management, sleep, and all these different things. But what are some of like your top things that you try to start on with somebody? Because I feel like in some ways, like many of these like people that come with this, like they're starting from zero. They have no idea anything in regards to nutrition and health and all those different things. So I guess like what are like the lowest hanging fruits that you typically start your clients with when you're like, you have the facts on that person has subclinical hypothyroidism?
Yeah, the first thing I try and do is I figure out why. Why do they have it? Why is their thyroid not responding, creating enough thyroid hormone? Maybe why is it not converting correctly? So the biggest things that I first look at are stress. What does the stress look like in their day-to-day life? Have they been under eating? Have they been over exercising? Because I kid you not, 99.9 times out of 10, that's what's occurring. They are just in the female athlete triad. And I say female because most hypothyroidism that I see is in females. Yep. I then look at nutrition deficiencies from B12, iron, magnesium, all the way to, zinc and selenium, iodine. So I look at those. That would be the second thing I do. And then the third thing I look at is mostly the gut. So I look at, is there food intolerances? Are there overgrowths like SIBO or Candida or H. pylori or a parasite? That, I kid you not, has happened for many of my clients. Do they have a low immune system? Is their secretory IgA low, meaning that they have intestinal permeability issues, quote unquote, leaky gut, which doesn't exist, quote unquote, but intestinal permeability is a thing. So look at those. I focus on replenishing the micronutrients that are low. So always testing to see what is low, and then asking why it could be low too. So do they have low stomach acid? Then they can't, get in the zinc or the B12 that they need. Putting them into protein deficiencies and then having gas and bloating later down the line. Because if you can't digest your proteins, those end up fermenting in your gut, and that contributes to SIBO. So there's a lot of different things. But I try and figure out, first, I look at nutrients, repleting those, stress reduction, which involves not only personal care, self-care, slothing, but also stressors in your environment. So reducing your toxic burden and inflammation from things like the air quality or your drinking water or endocrine disruptors and like things that you wash your body with, your skincare, things you clean with. I really focus on making sure that people are exercising in a way that feels good versus what drains them. Focus on that gut, of course. Always focus on the gut when you have hypothyroid issues. Always want to focus on the gut because I kid you not, 80% of the time, somebody's got a gut issue. Of course, prioritizing sleep, that self-care that I mentioned. And then one of the most important things when it comes down to the thyroid is, and I hate saying this, but a lot of people, they do need medication when it comes down to it. So making sure that they're on the adequate medication for them, one that they don't have a bad filler reaction to, because different medications have different fillers, making sure they're on the right dosage. But yeah, definitely need to figure out why they have hypothyroidism first, and then you address everything after that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. When it comes down to medication, because I wanted to kind of make a quick parenthesis on here. I know a lot of people that are asking me questions about thyroid. They're typically on Synthroid, which is like a pretty standard, thyroid medication. I'm also obviously heard people from that I've been taking kind of desiccated thyroid, obviously like bovine or something like this, and I'm not expecting you to kind of go in detail as far as medication, but is there anything that you notice, like, are like, for example, with you with subclinical thyroid, like, or subclinical hypothyroidism, at any given point that you actually medicate, and was it the typical kind of like Synthroid, and this is the typical thing that most people take, or you just kind of manage things in a different way?
Yeah, I like to think of finding your optimal thyroid hormone dosage, like finding Cinderella's glass slipper. So what makes a good fit for one person may not be a good fit for another person. So when taking that exogenous thyroid hormone actually won't do its job unless the root cause is revealed and removed. To give you an example, when I first got started and I was put on Nature Thyroid by my naturopath, my hormone, my medication didn't do the job because my cortisol was still high. So I was taking the thyroid hormone, still not feeling good, wondering why the heck nothing was changing. So you have to fix the issue or the thyroid hormone won't do its job.
Yeah, it's like the medication is the Band-Aid, and obviously your cortisol in your case was the root cause.
And for the most part, I like desiccated thyroid medications more because not only do they have an amount of thyroid hormone that more matches the creation of your own thyroid glands, they also have T2, T1, calcitonin, things that are not contained in those T3 or T4 only medications. And they also have, of course, if you just take Synthroid, you don't have T3. So if you take Synthroid, you have to have perfect conversion. You have to be able to convert all your T4 to T3. Whereas the desiccated, if you maybe have a thyroid conversion issue, nutrition deficiency, something wrong with your gut, that's when taking the desiccated will definitely be a lot better, because then you don't have to as heavily rely on conversion of your thyroid hormone. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I guess like with this, like, and I guess these decisions are not just like made by you as a person or like the client, but it's in many cases, this is obviously some decisions that are made by a doctor that is the one prescribing some of these different things.
Yeah. And I hate like saying this, but also at the same time, like your doctor will tell you what they think is going to work for you. But in the end, your doctor works for you. And if you want a higher dosage, you can ask for it.
Yeah.
And they've said yes. Sometimes they say no.
Yeah, but I think it's pretty important what you're talking about, the fact that it's not just about taking a pill. It's about also figuring out exactly how that pill is going to optimally work in your thyroid. And with that, it's just identifying the root causes. Which
primary hypothyroidism, sorry to cut you off. If you're primary, your thyroid's not working correctly. It's not creating thyroid hormone. If you've had Hashimotos, you've had destruction to your thyroid gland or thyroid tumor, yes, you have to rely on medication. If you have secondary hypothyroidism, and your hypothyroidism is because of a cortisol issue, it's because of a gut infection, or it's because of like Lyme disease or ABV, something, and there's nothing wrong with your thyroid itself, you don't need thyroid hormone. It can only help in the short term. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, specifically to weight loss, because I think, again, like a lot of people have, like, they kind of like blame, the whole thyroid issues as the way or the reasoning behind, like, they're just not losing weight. So I guess the question is, and literally this is somebody asked me, is like, am I doomed in my weight loss journey? Like, are people with hypothyroidism, like, never going to be able to lose weight? And it's a literally straight up question that somebody asked me. So what are your thoughts on that?
Heck no, you are not doomed. You can even compete. I've had many patients that are hypothyroid, even ones without a thyroid gland, be able to compete. So thyroid is no excuse. You just have to optimize your thyroid hormone, optimize the conversion too. If you optimize that, you optimize your overall quality of your life and your hormones, you'll be able to lose weight.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because I think it's just, I say the same thing. I just like, I feel like, but most people don't understand exactly what it takes. It's just like, which actually leads to like this part of like the talk that I wanted to kind of have with you, which is, dietary strategies and dietary methods. Of course you kind of hear, the very trendy, like, diets and things like that. For example, like ketogenic diets and like, yeah, this is the way that you can kind of treat hypothyroidism, or you need to do this, or you need to go vegan and all these different things like that. How do you kind of like, not necessarily handle, but how do you go about this? And I feel like in a way it can be a lot of noise, or is there actually a research or data to support any specific dietary approach versus another as a better way to approach or to manage and handle hypothyroidism?
So my goal with any client is to have them on the diet that is going to be most sustainable for them and make them feel their best and be as less restrictive as possible. So with hypothyroidism, there are certain nutrients and foods that can increase your ability to develop hypothyroidism and have immune reactions. So for some people, that does mean removing things like gluten, wheat, soy, eggs, nightshades, shellfish, and corn. So those are the top things that I typically see people react to. But when it comes down to what diet is best, the best diet for hypothyroidism is the one that is going to allow you to maximize your micronutrients in your diet, prioritize and have the best digestion possible, and what is going to allow you to feel your very best. So I do not like keto diets simply because two things. One, with the keto diet, you're looking at low amounts of carbohydrates, and with carbohydrates, those influence your T4 to T3 conversion. So you're diminishing that if you're ketogenic. And number two, I see a lot of ketogenic diets just be way suboptimal in fiber, as well as, of course, a lot of different leafy greens and fruits. And these things we need as anti-inflammatories to help combat inflammation in our bodies. And if we have inflammation, we're going to have thyroid issues potentially, or not getting any better. So that would be why I don't like keto. Vegan, I do not like because I feel it's extremely restrictive. And then people have then low amounts of protein in their diet if they're not staying on top of it, or they have things like B12, zinc, omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies, iron deficiencies, vitamin D, calcium, you name it. So I'm all about figuring out what is going to allow somebody to maximize their nutrition, feel their best.
Okay. Yeah.
I know there's a lot of different diets, like the specific carbohydrate diet, the GAPS diet, the autoimmune protocol, or, Whole30. I'm all about, if somebody wants to try something, do it, but you need to make sure you are getting all the micronutrients you need and not stressing yourself out. Like if your diet stresses you out, that's not helping the situation.
Yeah, it's like making it worse because, which is actually kind of like something do you feel like sometimes like nutrition itself is like kind of like boosting your cortisol levels and stressful at the same time, like stepping on a scale and feeling like you're not like, progressing and stuff like this. And like, I usually tell people like that you are stressing yourself out over something that is like, or the stress that you're creating because of like your like, or sometimes like a patience or like, understanding the process and all those different things are actually like holding you back from keeping to progress forward. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I tell my clients, you are hindering your healing by stressing out about healing, by trying to force the healing. Your body senses that. I kid you not. Your body's going to be like, you know what, bro? I don't think so. You're not going to rush me. I don't think so. So I tell my clients, you have to step away from pushing yourself into healing. Your body will heal when it's ready. Don't try and peer pressure it.
And how does that conversation go, for example, when you had to like you had to do the Netflix like sloth like protocol? Like how do you have, because I think this is the hardest for us in our programs is having that tough conversation with somebody that loves and uses working out and exercise and training like you and I do, to kind of cope with stress and all these different things. Like how does that conversation go to literally tell him like you need to step back from this and you need to literally take not just a day off, it's like sometimes a week or 2 weeks off or more?
Oh, it is a hard conversation. I always try and meet my clients with where they are. So I try and come to a conclusion with so there's a difference between what I think will be optimal for them and what will actually be optimal for them. So if I take away everything and that stresses them out completely, that's not helping their situation. They're still going to be stressed, and that's still going to have their cortisol up, and they're going to be freaking out, and that's not going to get them in the right direction. So I try and meet them with what would be doable for them, and also what I think would be best. And then week by week, we try and get even more to where I want them to be. So it's kind of like walking a fine line, but trying to give them the self-efficacy to make the change. And then slowly, them seeing that these changes are not making them gain weight. They're not causing anything bad. They're feeling better with the changes. And then they're more likely to trust me. And I have that rapport for them to continue to make the changes that I suggest.
Good. Yeah, I think it's definitely a tough conversation, but I feel like it's kind of like meeting them halfway.
People, I haven't done that. I've been like, you know what? You can't do any of this. And I made them cry, like, to be honest. But
you need to tell them what they need to hear.
Yeah, that's what you're not hiring me to, just tell you what you want to hear. You're hiring me to get you feeling better and the best you've ever been.
Yeah, that's huge. Another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like, do you believe that the current like diet, I don't like to call it diet culture, but just like the whole like restriction, like all these different kinds of like things when it comes down to dieting that's been happening in the past few decades or whatever. Do you feel that has a lot to do with so many women nowadays actually kind of experiencing or dealing with like, thyroid problems?
Oh, I think the issue is that people are just overstressed and undernourished. They're overstressed, overeating, and undernourished. I think that's the issue.
Yeah. So essentially, like they're just, in the stress because of the society that we live in, the go, never stop. And then they're overeating because it's just so food is so easily accessible nowadays, basically.
Yeah. And then the food that's easily accessible is less than nutritious. And then you look at people not getting their adequate micronutrients or not getting the amount of fiber that they need, and then having gut issues. I think there's no one like key reason that people are developing hypothyroidism. I think it's everything. And then you have the environmental toxins that are increasing on a freaking day-to-day basis that are just disrupting to everybody's hormones and their thyroid. So I think it's everything, honestly. I like to think of the issue, and I tell my clients this, when you start developing these hormone imbalances, whether that's thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, everything is like a bucket. So you have all these little drops in the buckets. And when the bucket starts getting to where it's overflowing, that's when the health happens.
That's when the shit hit the fan pretty much at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, those are basically some of like the things that I definitely kind of wanted to cover. Now, before obviously we kind of like wrap it up, like what would be like somebody struggling with this? Like what would be like number 1, 2, and 3 things you would tell them to do immediately? And, of course, like seeking nutrition help or coaching is definitely going to probably be one of them. But just so people, because I feel like we talked about a lot of things, like, in some ways, like people may feel overwhelmed by everything that we kind of like discussed. But is there anything specific that you would say, what, it's okay. You're not broken. We're going to, it's fixable. Here's like the first thing, second and third, you probably need to be focusing on. What would those be?
Okay. First thing, adopt a 3-legged dog. Just kidding.
That will definitely reduce your stress levels, or at least like it will make you a happier person.
Oh, he's sitting on top of me trying to eat my arm. Okay. First thing you want to do is optimize your nutrition. I want you to ask yourself, what micronutrients could I eat more of? Leafy greens, lots of different colors and fruits. Focus on color in your diet. Take away things that you think you're intolerant to or may cause you inflammation. I kid you not, a lot of times it's gluten, soy, added sugars. Look at those top ones, okay? So gluten, soy, added sugars. Those are the top ones. The next thing I try and say is focus on stress reduction. Get adequate sleep, at least 7 to 8 hours per night. Make sure you're not watching TV without blue light blocking glasses in the evenings. Try and balance your cortisol. Go on daily walks. Get in nature. Focus on self-care. Don't burn your candle at both ends. Don't be me. Not helpful. And then number 3, I like to say, focus on maximizing the quality of your gut health. So make sure that you are properly digesting your foods, slowly, mindfully eating, chewing your food thoroughly, not chugging water with your meals. Make sure that you're getting a good, adequate fiber intake. I say at least 30 grams. Like, you know, as dietitians, we're told 25 grams for women, but I say try and get 30 to 45.
Yeah, me too.
Feed those gut bugs, best friends. And also with digestive health, maybe it's probiotics, maybe it's fermented foods, but I like to say focusing on prebiotics first. So those good prebiotics you're looking at, like leafy greens, asparagus, jicama, fiber, you know, you name it. There's a bunch of different sources, but get your prebiotics in. And those would be my top 3.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think for people listening in, I think it's important, like, you know, if you definitely want a resource to learn more about this kind of stuff. I know, Lacey, you have a podcast. Is that still active, or most of your content is kind of coming out on social media?
I have a podcast. I'm also re-releasing my thyroid hormone course. Of course, I'm only going to be releasing that to like 15 people because I want to beta launch it. So I am also going to have that again. My book will be out as of 2021. Yeah. And
that's good.
A lot of knowledge.
A lot of knowledge. Well, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, if this is what this girl can do in like 50 minutes to an hour, like imagine what a book is definitely going to have. So that is awesome. So again, like that, those are the main things. So how can people like literally reach out to you, find you, connect with you, you know, like to basically kind of like learn more about it? Like we know exactly what you got going on, but is there a specific kind of like place where we can kind of direct everybody so we can add to the show notes as well?
Yeah, of course. So you can follow me at Faith and Fit on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. And I post, you know, I like to think I post a lot of helpful educational tools for all women, even men. And then you can follow my podcast at Uplift Fit Nutrition. That's where I post a lot of different educational content as well. Make sure you're on my email list. I kid you not. I have been making sure every single week I send out something helpful in regards to hormones or thyroid health or even my own story. Like I just a couple of weeks ago told people exactly what I did, from supplements to my sloughing technique, every single thing I did to heal my thyroid. So make sure you're on my email list. And
that's awesome. And we literally didn't, I see, that's why I need to keep bringing you on, because now we didn't really have a chance to talk about supplements or what your thought process behind your own supplement line and like women's health. So that's just basically an excuse for me to bring you back and chat a little bit about this. Hopefully as we get closer for you to launch your supplement line and people understand exactly the reasoning behind it.
You should have me on next time and we can talk about the crap in the supplement industry, because it's made me so angry.
Oh, we've heard about it, but I'm sure like you've been getting it firsthand experience now, the fact that you're actually launching your own. So
that the manufacturer tell me, you know, you can skip the heavy metal testing. What? Whoa.
That is crazy. Like that's literally, I'm trying to create something for women's health, and like heavy metals is one of the biggest issues, and you're telling me that I need to kind of skip this altogether.
I was like, you know what? I think we're not going to be a good fit.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. So again, I want to thank you like a million times for being and taking the time here today to kind of share your knowledge with us. I'm sure people are going to be extremely excited to be able to kind of listen to this episode. And of course, guys, if you're listening to this and you want to learn more about Lacey and what she does and just kind of stay on top of it, I'm literally going to join her email list, because I'm not on it and I feel like I need to be. So make sure that you kind of go on the show notes so you can kind of. So can people just go to your website to kind of like opt in to receive your newsletters?
Yes, my new website actually comes out this week. So
sweet, perfect timing.
I know,
because this is going to release a couple of weeks from like today's like recording. So by the time that you're listening to this, the website is out and the link is in the show notes.
Beautiful website is alive, and you can go straight to the homepage.
That's awesome. Well, that's exactly where you can find it. Again, Lacey, thank you so much for taking the time here today. And thank you guys for listening in today's Vegan Nutrition Radio episode.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.